Today on Pilgrim Radio's His People, Brett McCracken on the wisdom of sleep.
If you ever hear that expression, like sleep on it, when you wake up in the morning, you might have like a different view of things. If you go to bed really upset or angry emotionally, like oftentimes when you wake up in the morning, it's just a little bit less intense, those emotions. That's because of this like mechanism that's happening in our brains that we call dreams.
Brett McCracken next. Coming up today, a topic I don't believe we've discussed before on His People, sleep. Spencer Dalke is with Gospel Coalition writer and editor Brett McCracken to discuss his new book, The Wisdom of Sleep, How Rest Reveals God's Truth and Revives Weary Souls.
What prompted you to write a whole book about sleep?
I think a couple things. One is just I've always had a strange fascination with sleep, thinking about it philosophically and as a Christian, just like, why would God create us to have to do this? Like sleep a third of our lives, that kind of seems illogical. Like, how can we be useful and productive if we're sleeping a third of our lives? He didn't have to create us that way. He could have just as easily created us to always be on and to have infinite capacity to produce and work, but he didn't. And that question of like the wisdom of God in designing us this way was kind of the animating question for the book. So there's that aspect. And then I also just feel like it's a timelier than ever topic to address in our cultural moment where technology and smartphones and AI now are both giving us the temptation to conceive of ourselves like machines. Like we can always be on, we can always be productive, we can optimize every single moment of our lives with our devices that go with us everywhere. And I just think it's a moment where we need to think carefully about what it means to be human. And one of the things that I think is key to that conversation is our limitations. Humans are limited creatures. We don't have infinite capacity. We have to turn off. We have to rest. And that's by God's design. And so I think the topic is timeless, of course. Everyone sleeps. Everyone always has slept. Everyone always will sleep. But it's also a timely topic right now, I think.
How do we know that our need for sleep is an intentional part of God's design for our humanity versus maybe it's a post-fall reality?
Yeah, that's a great question. And people often bring that up, like, isn't sleep just a product of the fall? But if you look at Genesis, before Adam and Eve fell, there's an example of Adam sleeping. It's the famous moment when God created Eve while Adam slept, right? There's a verse that says, in his deep sleep, God created Eve from the rib, you know? So that deep sleep of Adam predates the fall. And I think that, as well as just the fact that night and day and the sun and the moon, you know, the light that governs the day, the light that governs the night, those were all things that were in that creation sequence in the first chapters of Genesis before the fall. And so I think it's safe to assume that if the cycles of like night and day and darkness and light and the sun and the moon were there at the very beginning, then sleep and rest, nocturnal sleep for not just humans, but all of the creatures that God created was there as well, right there at the beginning.
We're coming at maybe the subject from the productivity versus rest. God gives us a lot of different vocations simultaneously. For you, senior editor at Gospel Coalition, and then presumably husband, father, all of these different things. How do you personally navigate that tension between productivity and rest and sleep?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard season for that right now because I have children. We have a new baby that's 6 months old, and any parent of babies knows that sleep is a big part of the early months of children. Lack of sleep, making sure they are getting enough sleep, doing everything you can to kind of keep things quiet and so that they can sleep. So yeah, I think in my season of life right now as a dad of 4 children, including a baby, it's just a topic that looms very large in my everyday life. Thankfully, I'm getting pretty good sleep, even in the midst of, the weariness of being a parent. But it's just a topic that looms large, not just my sleep habits, but those of all of my children. The more that I read about sleep, and I did a lot of reading and research about the science of sleep and all the health benefits that are connected to sleep, the more I realize that as a parent, part of my stewardship of raising my kids, in terms of their overall health, is sleep, making sure that they're sleeping. So as kids get older, they don't like having to go to sleep and they fight it, and bedtime can be a battle, right? But I'm always telling my kids, like, guys, sleep is so good for you. Like, I know you don't want to go to sleep, but you will be happier and you'll feel better in the morning if you go to sleep when daddy is asking you to. They don't quite understand that, but I don't know, maybe the fact that daddy is writing a whole book called The Wisdom of Sleep right now, maybe they'll start to not fight bedtime as much.
You mentioned, isn't it? It's something like 8 hours, I think, that people recommend, to sleep every day. So
that's actually gone down a little bit. Like in the most recent study, it's like somewhere between 6.4 and 7.8 is like the recommended amount, the
Really?
ideal amount.
Is there a particular reason why that changed?
I think just the more studies that are done and like long-term studies of like sleep habits and like correlated health outcomes. But interestingly, in that study, one of the findings is that your health benefits start to diminish both if you get less than that recommended amount and if you get more. So if you actually sleep like 9 hours a night every night, your health benefits start to get less because it's not good for you to sleep too much. So there is kind of a window of like the optimal amount of sleep that researchers are finding.
Huh. That is interesting. I did not know that. Well, anyway, I mean, regardless, it's about a third of our lives that we are spending sleeping. Yes. You've mentioned that God has obviously designed us this way. Your book is subtitled, it's Revealing God's Truth. What sort of truths do we find in God's design for sleep?
Yeah, I mean, there's about half of the book is like looking at what sleep reveals about God. And like each chapter kind of drills down on kind of an attribute of who God is that sleep kind of shows us in a way. I think one of the big ones that has been a beautiful truth for me to be reminded of is just the sovereignty of God. I have to sleep, but he doesn't. So he's awake while we sleep, and he's got the whole world under control, and we can rest easy because of that. There's the beautiful Psalm 121, which says, he who keeps Israel will not slumber or sleep, right? The keeper of your life, God, doesn't sleep. And so that you can go to bed in that comfort, right? You can rest easy in the sovereignty of God. One of the spiritual disciplines that is tied up with sleep is that it's practicing trust. It's like an embodied expression of our trust in God. Because if you have weak trust in God, you don't really believe that he's kind of sovereign over all things and he's like the keeper of your life and he's everything's going to be okay. You go to bed anxious, and a lot of people do. A lot of poor sleep is tied to anxiety about like, I haven't done enough, like my to-do list is way too long, I can't justify sleeping. But I think for Christians who, believe that life is not just about do, like it doesn't hinge on me always being productive and always doing. Like God is the one who ultimately accomplishes his mission, and it doesn't depend on me, so I can sleep. So I think trusting God and his sovereignty is a big part of it.
I'm reminded, sleep being a grace of God, like it is a pleasant thing to sleep too. And yet, I can speak from my own experience. It is very hard to get myself to go to bed on time. Yeah. Does that betray maybe something in our hearts that is idolatrous, something that is that we need to explore?
There's a lot in the book on the idea of God as a gracious giver and sleep as one of his gracious gifts. And And I talk a lot about kind of parallels to the gospel itself. Like, the gospel is it's only a gift to receive, right? You can't achieve it by your works. You can't will yourself to get the gospel. It's only something that you receive, and it's the greatest gift that there is. And sleep is kind of an interesting parallel to that, because we all know that if you're like really trying to force yourself to sleep, we know that kind of backfires, right? And it ends up kind of not working when you try to force yourself to sleep. Sleep is something that is best when you just kind of drift into it, when you just let it happen to you. You just kind of, you lay your head down, you surrender, if you will. It's like a posture of surrender. And then it just comes upon you like this uncontrollable, gracious gift. And I think that's a beautiful parallel to the gospel, right? Like when you try to earn it, it's never gonna work, right? It's only a gift received. It's not something achieved. And sleep is a beautiful kind of metaphor and parallel to that.
Now, I understand you also write about waking up in the morning is a daily rehearsal of the resurrection, which is like, oh my gosh, that's so good.
That was one of the things that like kind of initially sparked an interest in like writing a whole theological reflection on sleep, was the way that sleep and waking up every day is like this daily rehearsal of like death and resurrection, right? Like you go to sleep and you actually look like you're dead. Like historically, like, sleep was called the brother of death in the ancient world because of how similar it was. And even in the Bible, like dead people are often referred to as those who have fallen asleep. Those words, sleep and death, are kind of very close in connection. And even the look of it, right? You're laying down flat, your eyes are closed, you're in a basically catatonic state, you're mentally in another place. It's this mysterious realm of consciousness. So I feel like sleep is our closest proxy of death. And every night it's like this reminder of like, we will all die. Like this is a foretaste, it's an image of our eventual death. And so that's part of the wisdom of sleep, is that it's this reminder, if we let it remind us, that we are fallible and mortal creatures. But then the waking up piece is such a beautiful reminder that there is hope for us after death, right? Like by the grace of God, death isn't the end of the story. And we rise every morning, again, through no like conscious effort. Like while you're sleeping, you can't consciously tell yourself, get up, right? It's this like mysterious external grace that wakes us up. Now you can set an alarm and do those kind of technological interventions, and that sort of like does the job. But without technology, waking up in the morning is sort of this supernatural thing where you can't will yourself to do it. It's only by the grace of God that any of us wake up from sleep. And in fact, most deaths in the world happen in sleep. When I think like 4 a.m. in the morning is like the most common time of death worldwide, in that kind of darkest part of the night when you're in the deepest sleep. So the space between sleep and death is very thin, but what a gift, what a grace that we rise in the morning. And I think for us as Christians, it's just an invitation every morning to think about that, to dwell on the fact that one day we will rise to an eternal sunshine, and like an eternal sunrise in the presence of God. And there will be no more night. There will be no more darkness. There will be no more kind of reminder of death, which is what sleep is. And that's because of Jesus and because of the gospel. And so again, sleep and waking up is an opportunity to point us straight to the heart of the gospel.
My guest today is Brett McCracken. He's a senior editor for the Gospel Coalition and the author of The Wisdom of Sleep, How Rest Reveals God's Truth and Revives Weary Souls. How do you think we Christians today can better practice sleep?
There's a couple levels to that. Like, I think there's the physical stewardship of our bodies piece, which we believe as Christians that God gives us these bodies. They're temples, right? We need to take care of them. We need to steward them well. I actually make the argument at one point in the book that to be pro-sleep is to be pro-life, because the more science shows us about sleep, the more it makes it clear that your life will actually be extended if you get regular good sleep. And so many diseases and sicknesses are actually correlated with poor sleep habits. So I think for Christians, one of the arguments for prioritizing sleep is simply we want to honor the bodies God gave us, and we want to practice habits that steward those bodies well. I think another piece is more missional in terms of our relationships with others. If one of the greatest commandments is to love others, to love our neighbor, you do that better if you are well rested. Everyone knows that, whether a parent with, their children or your coworkers, like you're kind of grumpy and you're not going to be at your best with those people in your life if you are constantly tired and you're not getting good sleep. So my good sleep habits actually serves those in my life. When I'm a tired dad, I'm a grumpy dad. I can often be an angry dad. But when I am rested, I'm loving them well, and I'm a better worker in my job if I'm well rested. So I'm serving my boss, I'm serving my coworkers because of my sleep habits. So I think that's another piece for Christians. An argument for good sleep is about loving others and our kind of missional presence in the world. And then I think the third piece, and probably the most important piece, is just we glorify God, right? We glorify God by expressing our trust in him, by sleeping, by receiving this gift, by basically accepting our limitations and being reminded every day that he is God, he is the creator. We are not. We are just lowly creatures who have to turn off for a third of our lives. And also just the miracle of what sleep does for us, this received gift, this grace that we just receive at night for 7 hours. There's so much that it does for us physically, mentally. And I think for me, that is an opportunity to just marvel at the Creator and to worship him. There's a whole chapter in the book on worship and the way that sleep should really lead us to worship God for how marvelous, how wonderful he is as a creator, that he would give us this built-in mechanism for restoration, which is what it is. Sleep is one big restorative machine. Like every system of your body is reset and restored by sleep. And so when the scriptures talk about like new mercies every morning, part of those mercies biologically are the way that our body is just recharged and reset because of this creational design of our good and gracious God.
I don't know if you address this in your book, but dreams. Throughout scripture, we see dreams, mean
There's two
things?
chapters in the book on dreams.
What do we as Christians in a very sciencey age, what do we do with those dreams? Do they mean things, or are they just the restoring of brain function?
Yeah. I would say both. And that's the approach I take in the book. So the two chapters on dreams, one of them is kind of science's take on dreams and all the research about like what science believes dreams are for. And there's actually a lot of compelling stuff. Some researchers describe dreams as like this overnight therapy where dreams are kind of helping us emotionally heal. So I just mentioned like all the physical systems that are reset in our sleep. Researchers think that dreams is kind of like a cognitive, emotional reset. Like that's the purpose that it serves. And you can kind of see that because if you ever hear that expression, like sleep on it, when you wake up in the morning, you might have like a different view of things. If you go to bed really upset or angry emotionally, like oftentimes when you wake up in the morning, it's just a little bit less intense, those emotions. That's because of this like mechanism that's happening in our brains that we call dreams. So the first chapter in my book on dreams kind of goes through all the science. And it's, again, for me, all of that science is just an opportunity to like marvel at like God who made this. Some of those scientists might think this is a mistake of evolution. It's just kind of, this is how humans developed. I believe God designed us to dream from the very beginning, and it's like part of his like ingenious design. And that leads me to worship him. But then the second chapter on dreams is kind of the Christian take, like the biblical take. Where do dreams show up in Scripture? And as we know, if you're familiar with the Bible, they're everywhere, like as a means of divine communication, right? Like there's so many examples of God speaking to individuals in dreams, both his people and also like pagan kings that he like, gives a dream to that leads them to some sort of action that is part of his will, part of his purposes in the world. So as Christians, I think we have to believe if that kind of divine communication through dreams shows up throughout Scripture, I believe we need to kind of have a category for that even today. And if you look at like the Muslim world today, 2026, so many Muslim people who are coming to Jesus, who are becoming Christians, like some high percentage say that it was because of a dream. It was because they had a dream where like Jesus showed up or the Bible showed up, and that was what they point to for their conversion. So I believe God is still working through our dreams to advance his purposes. And most people I talk to have examples from their own life of like a dream that they had where they felt like God was prompting them in some way or convicting them. I think that God uses our dreams to convict us of sin, because sometimes we have dreams that we don't like, where we do things that are kind of like a little bit disturbing. Like, why would I be dreaming of that? And I think that's actually an invitation to reflect and kind of be warned about like your sin and your sin nature. I also talk about spiritual warfare in that chapter. I think the dream realm is a very active space for not only God to be present and communicating, but also the devil and demons. And a lot of people have like demonic dreams, to be honest. And the realm of dreams and things like sleep paralysis are very scary and disturbing. And science has one explanation for what that is. But I think people of faith who believe that like angels and demons, that whole realm is very real. We have another category for understanding what is actually happening in the darkest moments of nightmares and sleep terrors and sleep paralysis. So yeah, I mean, the dream stuff is so fascinating. I could have written a whole book just on dreams, but I at least have 2 pretty substantial chapters in the book.
Doesn't Freud or Nietzsche or whatever talk about like, here's how to interpret your dreams?
Oh yeah. Freud was big on dreams, and I talk a little bit about that in the book. Even the most like materialist, like sciencey atheist today, I think still talks about dreams as this like supernatural realm, right? Like we just know intuitively, having lived life dreaming, all of us dream every night. You don't remember all of your dreams, but all of us dream every night. We've all had experiences where we can't just explain it as this like evolutionary adaptation in nature. There's something there that's like a realm that is like a portal into something beyond our physical, observable universe.
Is there anything that surprised you about how God has designed us to sleep?
Yeah, I mean, I think I knew this, but I think one of the things that is really fascinating about the science of sleep is that there's like a right proportion of like sleep and wakefulness. We just talked about this with like the window of like ideal optimal sleep is between like 6.4 and 7.8, something like that. It's just interesting to me that like if you don't sleep enough, things go wonky with your health. And if you sleep too much, things go wonky. And to me, that just speaks to how God designed everything to be in this interesting, harmonious balance. And it's throughout his creation, right? Even if you look at the way Genesis describes creation, it's like the night and the day in balance, and the waters above and the waters below in balance, the land and the sea, male and female, like all of these things are like two kind of polarities, like opposites, but they are together in relationship. They make something beautiful. I just never thought about sleeping and wakefulness within that category of God's kind of harmonious creation, but it totally is. And if you never sleep, you will die. There's a disorder that's really scary that I talk about in the book called fatal familial insomnia. It's a very rare disorder, but if you get that disorder, you basically can't sleep, and over time you will die. And there's been examples of people that have this disorder and they don't sleep for months because they can't, and eventually they die because the body can't function without sleep. So it's a very scary disorder, but it speaks to the fact that like if we only were awake, it's like hell. Like, and I think the opposite is true. Like if you only ever sleep, that's also like a version of hell, because like that's like death, right? If you're just sleeping, it's like people who are in a coma or unconscious. We are meant to have these two things in balance, and it's not a 50-50 balance. It's more like 1/3, 2/3, but it's still kind of this harmonious balance. And it's just interesting that science is showing that increasingly to be the case.
Just share some tips, I guess, with our listeners about how to sleep well. How do we prepare ourselves for sleep?
Yeah, I mean, there are other books that are better for this than mine. My book is not primarily like a how to sleep well book, although I do have a little of that in some of the chapters. But I mean, a few tips that you see a lot of experts mention. One is just try to go to bed at the same time every night. Like our bodies are better when they're kind of on schedules, and every parent knows that with children, but it's true for us as well. So try your best to kind of have a regular bedtime and a regular getting up time. So that's one thing. Some other things that are probably obvious to listeners: sleep in total darkness. So room darkening shades, try not to have like super bright night lights. Our bodies are created, again, by God's design to sleep when it's dark. When the sun goes down and the moon comes up, our bodies are actually triggered to want to sleep. And so try not to interfere with that with lights, including lights from your phone, right? So don't scroll on your phone in bed right before you go to sleep, because the light from your phone, as well as the content that you're scrolling through on your phone, can disrupt your sleep. And then finally, I would say, like, don't do things like physical exercise too late at night, drinking alcohol, like tobacco. All of those things are proven to disrupt a good night's sleep. So those are a few tips, but there's a lot other ones that you can find in books and on websites.
You've been listening to His People on Pilgrim Radio. Many thanks to our guest, Gospel Coalition writer and editor Brett McCracken. His new book is The Wisdom of Sleep: How Rest Reveals God's Truth and Revives Weary Souls. The book is set to be released in August. On tomorrow's program, it's Mark Ellis on stories of God's providence to inspire faith.
He said everything around him in terms of furniture was demolished except for his desk. His Bible was still sitting on top of the desk, and all the ceilings had collapsed, the sprinklers were on, there was fire everywhere. And the story of how he makes it out of that office and survives, I don't want to spoil it for the readers. It's a gripping story of God saving him.
That's tomorrow at this same time, right here on His People. Thanks for listening.